All right, everyone. Yesterday, CNN said, well, we've got inside sources saying that within, probably like the next week or so, very, very soon, the Mueller report has wrapped up. They're going to finalize the report. Mueller's going to, take his bullshit down and put it in writing, so to speak, and then hand it off to Barr, hand it off to the DOJ for basically it to be reviewed, and then a report is handed to Congress. It is unlikely that a significant amount of the content there is ever going to be given to the public, and I can see in the first few hours after this announcement was made. Now, keep in mind this is a CNN tip. We know that they're not necessarily the most reliable, true news source out there. They could be totally wrong because it could be one of those anonymous leaks from within the White House that never pans out because it's literally just someone trolling CNN or trying to put the Mueller probe into the news. Maybe they're a Trump fan, maybe they're a Democrat, who knows. So keep that in mind. Let's assume that this is true. And I do expect the Mueller probe to wrap up fairly soon. I mean, there's only a certain amount of time you can stretch it out. People are beginning to lose interest. This story, despite the fact that it's like monumental, if true, barely trended for like 5 hours before it got knocked off by fucking everything else under the sun. Maxine Waters, among all things. What's going to happen, almost certainly, is that Trump is not going to be indicted because he's done nothing wrong. You can see all of these lamestream outlets and pundits and analysts and Democratic politicians scrambling to lay the groundwork preemptively to explain why that will be the case. The number one enemy that they're focusing on, William Barr, saying Trump gets his DOJ appointee and he's going to cover for Trump. Number two, Trump is just really good at covering his tracks. Like the fact that you didn't find evidence of a crime means he's just really slimy. He's really good at this. Number three, Mueller's been compromised. He's been threatened. He got bought off, something like that. This reminds me of the sour grapes of the Benghazi period, to tell the truth. Despite the fact that things demonstrably went terribly wrong there and it was a major scandal and there should have been some repercussions for certain people in government for lack of proper oversight, ultimately the Republicans bungled it so badly and spent so long and so much money looking into minutia associated with Benghazi that there was never any real closure. That's what they've done with Mueller. What has happened with the Mueller probe, this has been my thing all along. This is what I've said consistently now for basically 2 years. I think that what happened, you had an op research document made, the Steele dossier, among other things. It was made by the Jeb Bush campaign. The Clinton campaign, after that folded, bought it up. They offered it to them. This shows, by the way, by the way, earth to everybody out there. Don't you find it funny that a bunch of Republicans were selling shit to the Clinton camp? I suppose if you have Trump derangement syndrome, that means that you think that the Clintons and the Bushes are benevolent. Like all of a sudden the Bushes are good people and not backstabbing corporate opportunists, and they were just trying to stop that evil orange Nazi. I see it a different way, but some people have deluded themselves into thinking that George W. of all people is honest. It's hilarious, given the fucking Iraq War or given Katrina, or the hunt for Osama, or basically anything else Bush did. But no, his bungling doesn't matter anymore in their minds. They're so deranged. They made the document. The Clintons got a hold of it. People associated with the Clintons who weren't probably fully in the know saw that, thought it was real, didn't realize that it was bullshit, and fronted it through FBI agents who were partisan, the Page Sturzock sort of bullshit. Screwing each other, probably still are. Fed it through them. It manages to work its way to the FISA court because stripped of all context, it could be taken as though it was a real document. The problem is the FISA court is a rubber stamping outlet for the government to gain expansive warrants for probes and things like that, when a normal court probably wouldn't grant the warrant. It's their way of getting around normal judicial procedures, which allow people to defend themselves, which allow people to have access to that evidence to present a defense. You don't get to do that with a FISA court. Everything's classified and under lock and key, and 10 years later through a FOIA you might be able to see a redacted version of what you need to see in order to just defend your own character. The FISA court's unconstitutional, by the way, in that sense, but we act as though it's not because of my pragmatism. So the FISA court, which rubber stamps literally 99.9%, that's not an exaggeration, of everything that comes its way from the intel community or whoever else is utilizing it at the time, fronts it to Rosenstein. Rosenstein, in front of Congress, under oath, gave this following testimony. I can't recall whether I read this FISA warrant before I signed off on it. The deputy AG, I think he is, or is he the deputy FBI director? I can't remember which. I think DOJ. Couldn't even remember if he signed a warrant to spy on an active presidential campaign. So he's either totally inept, which syncs up perfectly with my theory, which is that this is a series of unfortunate events that really snowballed, or he's lying through his teeth, which is altogether likely. He did read it. He was politically partisan. He wanted to go after Trump specifically because they feel he's a threat, essentially. The deep state felt he was a threat. They trigger a probe because they're trying to stop him for political reasons. They don't expect him at that time to win, number one. I stated it's easy for a party to rig the primaries. It's very hard for them to rig a general because typically they don't have to. You get two controlled opposition candidates. They don't care if the Democrat or the Republican wins. Everyone who's actually entrenched in bureaucracy, all the FBI, the CIA, they're going to have their jobs and have their pensions and have everything else carte blanche to do what they want to do, regardless of which party is in charge. Because whoever's won has been coronated by a bunch of corporations that work with them anyway. Trump bucked that trend. They felt he was a threat, but they didn't expect him to win. This is literally their insurance policy in the event that he did. They looked into him, and I think that they thought this. I think that they went in assuming. I think the people at the top knew the Steele dossier is bullshit. They went in thinking they were going to find dirt on Trump. When they started investigating, trust me, they had carte blanche to talk to everyone, to look into everything. They would have known if Trump had done shady shit. They found no evidence, and in the first few months they said, whoops, we done goofed real fucking bad. Now this dude, number one, he's smarter than we thought. He's outmaneuvering us. Number two, he's bypassing the normal media, which I don't think they expected him to do. I think they expected him to settle down. Keep in mind, even the people that head the CIA, FBI and stuff, they are fallible individuals. They're capable of making strategic mistakes. He was bypassing them, and they realized, hey, at the very least, he's real damn good at covering his tracks. We don't have anything on him. Well, we're going to have to justify this probe, because if word gets out about how bungled this was and how expansive the probes, we are all going to lose our jobs. We are all going to get fucked. The Trump administration will literally clean house. It might shutter the FBI. It could literally, and I think some of them, the more benevolent among them, were worried about a civil war. I honestly believe that there are people that are looking out for the public's interest. I think they're wrong. I think that it's a bit hyperbolic, but I honestly believe that there are people in the government that do actually give a damn to some degree, and they're fucking terrified. Maybe they're afraid Trump really is nuts, like the Kissinger strategy worked a little bit too well. Anyway, they start the probe. They realize Trump is clean as a whistle, so what do? They go after all these other people. They go after Manafort. Manafort was fired from the Trump campaign, wasn't doing shady shit concurrent with it, had done things 10 fucking years prior, had laundered money, not related directly to U.S. politics, not related to the Trump campaign. He wasn't even talking to Trump at the time. Hell, he was working with a bunch of Democrats who magically were granted immunity for testimony. Remember the Podesta group? You do realize that he was working with the Podesta group in Ukraine to launder this money, right? Doesn't that strike anyone as odd? Another Republican neocon working with a bunch of Democrats? Oh, who would have guessed that could possibly be involved? I wonder how they found that out so quickly. Could it be that there's somebody who's, looking out for the deep state in there? Is it John Podesta's brother? Is it someone related to the Podestas, or maybe the Clintons? I think that it probably is. So they nail him, and they say, well, that's a big charge. There's millions of dollars of money laundering. He's looking at the rest of his life in jail. That's pretty good, but they got to keep looking. So I use that as a springboard. That basically, over time, they're slowly charging different people, because otherwise the public will crucify them. They have to keep making it look like, oh, well, we got another bad guy. Papadopoulos, he gets 2 weeks in jail. Roger Stone, he's looking at a few months, maybe a year or two in prison. He probably won't get that. He's pled not guilty as of today. He probably won't. He's not even going to get found guilty on these charges, probably. It'll be like Flynn. They tried to get Flynn. Flynn's not at the moment in jail. Flynn's free out walking around and doing whatever he wants to do. It's not clear they're even going to continue charges. Cohen gets hauled in. Well, Cohen's in on charges, but none of the stories he spun about Trump turned out to be true. This is a pretty lackluster showing. I think that they're really betting on Manafort to get him out of this. What they're counting on is they're going to slap Manafort as hard as possible and make a big deal about it, roughly around the same time they end the report. But Trump will not be indicted. And they're going to have to justify to all the far left to see they're not going to believe that Trump is clean. They've got Trump derangement syndrome so badly that it's impossible for them to mentally formulate Trump not being guilty. So in their minds, it's like the fact that there's no evidence means that we need to dig harder. Or he's just really slimy, really good at covering his tracks. Or William Barr, or maybe even Mueller, has been compromised and they're not going to charge him or something. And it's going to be hilarious. His approval is going to rise 3 or 4 points on that day. It'll be near 50 at that point. I guarantee you that there are a significant number, some millions of Americans who overall like Trump, but don't want to say they support him because they're afraid of him getting impeached. Well, that problem goes away after the Mueller report. It doesn't matter how much Adam Schiff decides to look into it. It doesn't matter if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of all people, wants more access to Trump's tax records that I guarantee Mueller has already seen. And he probably won't even mention him. And that's the other thing. The report is not going to be made largely public. The vast majority of it's classified or top secret or whatever. The DOJ will see it. Mueller will know of it. Congress will have a fairly good, overview of it, although even they won't get full access necessarily. It's up to the Department of Justice, which is headed by a recent Trump appointee. Oh, well, there's your plausible deniability when he doesn't end up getting indicted. It's going to be funny. And so, and the people in Congress, the Democrats will do the sour grapes strategic thing, because there's an election coming up, of course. And they're going to come out and say, well, we know that he's guilty and shit. It's just, Mueller should have gone further. We're going to keep investigating. It's going to be a bunch of bullshit. Nobody's going to take it seriously. Even a lot of the Democrats at that point will be like, okay, it's time to drop it. We've got an election going on. Why don't you formulate, a strategy that's related to offering someone an alternative to Trump's political platform? Like, hey, I want to lower, instead of the Democrats being the party of, we will obstruct everything, open borders, ICE is evil, we want to raise your taxes and, by the way, impeach the president or something. That's not really much of a platform. That's why they're having problems. That's why the Emerson matchup shows Trump leading from behind, oddly enough, by 2 or 3 points against basically any Democrat. While he's about to be exonerated of all things by Mueller, which means it'd probably be ahead in all of those matchups. And that's an Emerson poll, take it as you will. Not necessarily the most pro-Trump reliable firm that's out there. They've consistently underestimated his level of support. They underestimated Republicans for Senate races in the last election and Trump in 2016. Now, there's no reason to believe that methodology overall has changed. By the way, Trump's approval aside, it'll also mean higher turnout mainly for the Republicans. Some of those never-Trumpers will be deconverted because of the Mueller report finally no longer being over his head. Nobody cares if a bunch of partisan Democrats in the House investigate him. They'll have less latitude. Senate Intel already cleared him. Senate Intel is second to fucking God himself with regards to the ability of it to subpoena and call forth people to give testimony and look into his secretive documents. Senate Intel is half a step from Mueller himself with the most expansive probe ever in the history of the FISA courts. And they're just slightly behind him in terms of power. They didn't find anything. And they're not partisan. It's a bipartisan group. Democrats and Republicans. Some of those Democrats in Senate Intel fucking hate Trump. And they say, well, we didn't find anything. We're going to keep looking, but, we got to end this stage. And it's like, that's a total fucking cop-out, dude. But again, of course, this could all be bullshit because it's CNN saying that they have inside knowledge. Okay, who? The janitor at the White House overheard Mueller talking or something? Maybe Trump called up. Apparently, Trump was a businessman in the 80s. He used to call up media groups and give them tips about himself and shit like that just to get in the news so that his name would be out there. He used to kind of disguise his voice, but they could tell it was him, and he'd use pseudonyms and crazy shit like that. The funniest thing in the world to think of. I'm thinking of him in his throne or his golden crusted fucking toilet or something, making essentially what amount to crank calls to CNN's newsroom. And I'm thinking how funny that would really be. That's about all. Peace out.